Hi everyone! This video is a book review about a book that I have had in my possession for a very long time. And the title of this book is Great Love Poems. And it is published by Dover Thrift Editions and edited by Shane Weller. The reason I selected this book is because Valentine's Day is coming in less than a week, as well as Black Love Days. And I wanted to choose writings that were related to romantic love, just to stay within the tradition. I personally do not read anything romantic that often. I don't even read romance novels. However, I am a poetry fan, and that is why I gravitated towards this book. So if you are a person who loves to just listen to love poems, read them, then this video is for you. Before I get into my personal critique of this book, I wanted to share with you a little bit about the author or the editor. His name is Shane Weller, and he has a very impressive resume. So Shane Weller is the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation at University of Kent. It says, after studying at the universities of Oxford and Yale, Professor Shane Weller taught at Oxford before taking up a position in the Department of Comparative Literature at Kent. Prior to his appointment to the role of Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation, that is such a long title, he was the head of the School of European Culture and Languages. Shane's teaching and research interests lie in the fields of modern European literature and culture and the history of ideas. His publications include books and articles on a range of modern European writers and thinkers, as well as on topics such as the history of nihilism, cultural nationalism, and cosmopolitanism. His latest book, Language and Negativity in European Modernism Toward a Literature of the Unword. Man, that is a mouthful. You can tell this dude is a professor. Okay. Was published by Cambridge University Press in 2019. He has recently completed a book entitled The Idea of Europe, A Critical History, contracted for publication with Cambridge University Press in 2021. So, this dude knows what he is talking about as far as his selection in the poem or in the poets that he selected for this book in particular, which is another thing I have criticism about. This book was published in 1992, and there are 150 love poems that feature both English and American poets. It supposedly spans over 4 centuries of literary creation. At the beginning of this book, there is a note. And I'm going to break down this note because it's very important in the critique that I am about to give to this book. But listen to the note, and you will see what I mean. Note: the present anthology offers a selection of short poems written in English between the Renaissance and the present day on the subject of carnal love or the desire of one human being for another. The poems fall into 2 broad categories: those reflecting on the nature of love and those written from the standpoint, whether real or imaginary, of the lover. The selection seeks to represent the high points in the tradition of love poetry and to give a sense of the great diversity within that tradition. The poems are arranged chronologically by poet. Now remember this note. Remember this. So, when I read this book, keeping in mind the note, my assumption is you say great diversity. Great diversity within that tradition of poems between the Renaissance and the present day on the subject of carnal love. Most of these poems did not reach to the present day. Now, when you say present day, I'm making the assumption you're going from the Renaissance to the 90s. So I expect to see some poetry from, the late 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, all the way up to the 90s. But this man selected poems that most of them or a chunk of them were from the Renaissance, probably up to the late 1930s, early 1940s. Another issue is they keep emphasizing the great diversity within this love tradition or tradition of love poetry. But I honestly did not see that much diversity, especially in the poets that he chose. I am an English major. I received my Bachelor of Arts in English and Visual Art in 2013. Most of the poets in this book I have already come across in my studies. So when you claim that there is diversity within the poems that you selected, I expect to see at least some people of color, at least some women, but most of the poets that he selected were mostly white males. You did not come across many women until near the middle of the book, and there weren't that many women in there either. I saw Emily Dickinson, he had a few of her poems. Edna St. Vincent Millay, she was near the end. Christina Rossetti and Emily Bronte, but I honestly didn't see that many women. If I had been an adult in the 90s and I was on his editorial team, I would have made a couple of suggestions. Am I saying that the author or the editor was just, thinking in the frame of mind where I'm not going to have any poets of color at all? I don't know, because I don't know him personally. I think he goes through what a lot of us go through when we're interested in a subject. So for me, I'm interested in Black history, the history of people of African descent, people of color, and also women, because most of my work is targeted towards people of color and women and various things. So whenever I read a book, the first thing I look for is for the person of color or a woman, because I am a person of color and I am a woman. So I'm looking for myself. Whereas this editor, his whole life, his whole career is based on European studies. So naturally, he's going to gravitate towards that when he's selecting these different poets, because that is what is in his heart and that is what he gravitates toward. He might not know it, I guess. I don't know if there was anybody like offering him alternative viewpoints. But me personally, if I was on the editorial team for this book and we were working on this together, I would have said, hey, why don't you, if you're going like pre-1940s, why don't you choose like some Harlem Renaissance poets? We had Langston Hughes. He had some love poems. You had, what's his name? Claude McKay. That one woman, I can't remember what her name is. She wrote, I Want to Die While You Love Me. You could have even chosen turn of the century poets. You got Paul Laurence Dunbar. Uh, Even if you want to go further back, you could have chosen Phyllis Wheatley. She may have had love poems that were about nature. I don't know about carnal love, but she could have had some. Or not Jupiter Hammond. George Moses Horton. He was an enslaved black man who wrote a lot of poems, and he also had love poems. One was, I loved thee from the earliest dawn till first I saw thy beauty's ray, or something of that nature. So that's really the main criticism I have about this book, is I did not see the diversity that they claimed was in there. Maybe he's thinking diversity in style, but I just didn't see it. So now that that is out of the way, I wanted to go through the book and just talk about a couple of poems that really stood out to me. I saw a couple of my favorites in there. One favorite of mine is The Passionate Shepherd to His Love. It's a poem I memorized when I was a teenager, and I loved singing the song that somebody had made about this poem, even though the tune did not do the poem any justice. It's a very beautiful poem about um, the things a person will give to another just to show their love for them. There's also another poem in there called Her Reply, which is to the a response to the passionate shepherd to his love. The editor also chose a lot of John Donne. Like, he had a lot of John Donne poems. It went on for like almost 7 pages. One poem that I feel he should have put in there by John Donne was Catch a Falling Star, because that's a love poem. I think it's kind of neat. It's very short. It has very beautiful imagery in it, but I didn't see it in there. I noticed that even though most of these poems were written by men, there was really no balance. It was either I am very, very in love with you, or I hate you. You are an evil woman. And the common theme of like, and her blonde golden hair and her ivory skin. Oh, how I love her. And I was like, okay. I was sticking with the tradition. But I never noticed that before. Now that I've gotten older and just lived a couple of, I guess, years of maturity, I didn't notice how some of the poems that I used to like actually now, from an older perspective, seem kind of controlling, in a sense. Even though they're love poems, they do seem kind of controlling. Like, you are evil because you will not be with me, and I cannot believe you broke my heart. You are from the bowels of hell, woman. You are from the bowels of hell. That's literally how it sounds to me now. But there were some poems in here that I actually connected to. One was called The Parting, and it is by Michael Drayton. He lived between 1563 and 1631. His poem is on page 9. Usually I know if a poem connects to me because I feel it in my heart. When I'm reading it, by the middle of it, I'll be like, oh, this poem is for me, or I can totally relate to this. So here's the poem. The Parting. Since there's no help, come let us kiss and part. Nay, I have done. You get no more of me. And I am glad, yea, glad with all my heart, that thus so cleanly I myself can free. Shake hands forever, cancel all our vows, and when we meet at any time again, be it not seen in either of our brows, that we one jot of former love retain. Now at the last gasp of love's latest breath, when his pulse failing, passion speechless lies, when faith is kneeling by his bed of death, and innocence is closing up his eyes. Now if thou wouldst, when all have given him over, from death to life, thou mightest him yet recover. I don't know why, when I first began reading this poem, it reminded me of one of my exes. I dated this dude for maybe eight months or less. Maybe it was 9 months. I really don't know. It was less than a year. And he was younger than me. I call him the young ex when I talk about my exes. He was younger than me, and I was maybe like 28, and he was 21. I didn't know he was that young. But by the time he broke up with me, at first I was sad, but then I was actually relieved. I think it was one of the few breakups where I was relieved that the person had left me. Okay? Like, that's why I relate to the line, nay, I have done, you get no more of me. And I am glad, yay, glad with all my heart. Like when I say I was glad this dude was gone because his mother was crazy, and it was just almost like raising a child because we had different levels of maturity. Just the relief and the peace that I felt when he was out of my life made this poem so much more richer to me. And I know the last time I spoke to him, it was almost similar to the words in this poem, because he called me out of the blue. I was sitting eating lunch. He already had a girlfriend. He had moved out of town. And he called and was like, have you put a curse on me and my relationship? I'm like, dude, you're the third person this year that called and asked if I put a curse on you. I'm not thinking about you. He's like, Kiara, you have to get all of the love that you have for me out of your heart. You have to stop thinking about me. All the emotions that you have for me, you have to get rid of them. I was like, what are you literally talking about? Because I had literally not thought about this man. I had not daydreamed about him in months. So I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm over you. No, Kiara, you have to get rid of all of your emotions. Say that you will get rid of your emotions for me. How can I get rid of something that I've already gotten rid of? So that's why I thought this poem was kind of funny. Yeah. So the next poem. I noticed a lot in most of them that they used words like atomic. They were talking about just things on a cellular level. And I wonder if some of these love poems were influenced by the I guess past discoveries of science, and they basically incorporated it into their work. Because I did see one that mentioned atoms and cells and various things. So I'm going to have to research if some of the poets even dabbled in science, because, you know, during the Renaissance age, you want to be a Renaissance man or woman, you're going to dabble in several subjects and be adept in it. So perhaps some of them were involved in science. A lot of them made references to the Bible and Greek mythology, which is what my dear professor from school mentioned to us in our studies. He said, if you are an English major, one thing you have to study is Greek mythology and the Bible, so you know what they're talking about. And at the great cocktail party of life, you will be able to quote these poems and know what a person is talking about. And I was like, you know what, Dr. Hammer, you're actually kind of right, because some of these poems, I'm like, I do not know who this person is. You acting like I know this reference, and I do not. So if you are one who really loves beautifully written, flowery sounding poetry, I would suggest you get acquainted with the Bible, and you also get acquainted with Greek and Roman mythology, because there will be lots of references in there. Another list of poems that I liked are a poem called Sweet William's Farewell, and it is by John Gay. I enjoyed this poem because it's basically about a sailor who's traveling the seas, and his love is coming to bid him adieu, and it's an emotional meeting, but I don't know if he's really that into her. I don't know. He's like, oh, don't listen to what the landmen are saying about me having a mistress in every town. I love you. You are my true love, lady. I love you, and I will come back to you. That poem reminds me of that song called, I think it's called Looking Glass. Like, Brandy, you're a fine girl, what a good wife you would be, but my life, my love, and my lady is the sea. It's basically like that poem. It's basically like that song, but in a poem like centuries before. The next poem that I liked was called Sally in Our Alley. I didn't like how it was written. I just loved the concept of Sally in Our Alley. The main character of this poem, he is an indentured servant and he is in love with this woman who lives in poverty. He says that after he's done with 7 years of working, then he's going to marry her and they're going to start their family when he gets his money together. I enjoyed this poem because it reminded me of the biblical story of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. Even though Jacob got screwed over by his uncle, or I think it was his uncle. Yeah, by his uncle, working 7 years to end up with the woman he didn't want. He worked 7 more years for Rachel and ended up with the woman that he did want. So if you are a person who is in love and you're chasing after someone, remember that if they truly want you, they'll come get you themselves. If a person thinks that you're worth it, they will invest in you. You won't have to beg or pine for their attention. You won't have to suffer in order to receive love and affection from them. It will just come out of them naturally, and you won't have to ask twice. Like this man in the poem, Sally in Our Alley, he had nothing. He was poor and Sally was poor. People teased him for loving her and said, she's just nothing. She's just a poor girl. But he saw beauty in her, and he made a personal decision that no matter how long it would take, he would make her his wife because he felt she was worth it. So always remember that, YouTube subscribers. Meeting and Passing by Robert Frost. That is another poem that I enjoyed. I enjoyed it because he brings about, or he captures the shyness that a person feels when they're meeting someone that they're truly in love with or go to love in the future. In one line, he says, "Your eyes were looking to the ground." Or, what's it? 110. Your eyes were looking. Pointed the decimal off with one deep thrust, and all the time we talked, you seemed to see something down there to smile at in the dust. Like you're too shy to look into their eyes. I had that type of experience when I had a love at first sight experience. I was looking into the guy's eyes, but it was just so hard because I didn't want to be smiling too much. I'm just like, I don't want to make eye contact with him because I'll be looking so dumb just smiling in his face, all giddy and everything. And Robert Frost captures that in that particular stanza. Just the shyness you get when you're with a person that you really love and you just can't hide your joy. It's just radiating from your face. The next poem is by Christina Rossetti, and it is called A Birthday. I enjoyed this poem because she truly captures the colorful beauty of falling in love. There was one part where she says, "Raise me a dice of silk and down, hang it with bare and purple dyes, carve it in doves and pomegranates and peacocks with 100 eyes, work it in gold and silver grapes, in leaves and silver fleur-de-lis, because the birthday of my life is come, my love is come to me." Like that's really how it feels. Like when you meet a person that you're so in love with, and the day just gets brighter and the sun shines brighter and everything is magical and beautiful. Like you're just so happy and radiating with joy. That's basically how it feels. I had that type of experience when I was when I first met one of my exes, and our first date was at Forest Park. And everything just looked so beautiful that day. Even though it was a regular day, all of the flowers looked beautiful. The air smelled even nicer than it had smelled before. The fountain had all of the silvery sparkles, and the sun was shining on his face, and the sun was shining on my face, and that's basically how it feels. So if you've never been in love, it's an experience when you experience love at first sight. Some people say that it is not real, but it is real. Once you experience it, you will know. When you're in love with someone, it doesn't matter how many years pass. You'll still see them in that same light. You'll still look at them with love. There's another poem in here by Robert Burns called, I don't really remember what it's called, but it's basically a couple talking to one another, and the woman's like, oh, I still love you even though your hair is gray and you lost most of your hair, you're still the man that I love. And it's called John Anderson, My Joe. It's on page 54. Let's see. John Anderson, my Joe, John. When we were first acquaint, your locks were like the raven, your bony brow was brent. But now your brow is belled, John, your locks are like the snaw. But blessings on your frosty pow, John Anderson, my Joe. John Anderson, my Joe John. We climb the hill together, and mony a canty day, John. We've had we and another. Now we maun totter down, John, and hand in hand we'll go, and sleep together at the foot, John Anderson, my Joe. You know, because he was I can't remember if Robert Burns was Scottish or Irish, but he was either Scottish or Irish. So he wrote in one of those vernaculars. But it's poetry like that where you don't have to be the most attractive person. You don't have to be the smartest person. When somebody truly loves the essence of who you are, it doesn't matter how much time passes. They love the core of you. Another poem that I guess I will end with is She Walks in Beauty by George Gordon Lord Byron. Now, if you don't know anything about George Gordon Lord Byron, this dude was a player. He traveled playing people around. He's a very passionate man. I think he had a baby with his half-sister, but don't quote me on that. Very good at his marketing because he had himself painted. He basically lived the life that he wrote about. But he has this one poem in particular that I truly love because when I read it, I think of myself. Not the part where it says, she walks in beauty like the night of climeless, starry eyes and climeless skies, and all that's best of dark and bright. Hold on. 65. She walks in beauty like the night of cloudless climes and starry skies, and all that's best of dark and bright meet in her aspect and her eyes, thus mellowed to that tender light which heaven to gaudy day denies. So why does this remind me of me? Because my name, Kiara, in one language means little and dark, and in another language means bright. So when I read this poem, that's the first thing I thought of, like, oh, he's speaking to me. I am both dark and I am bright. But it's a beautiful, beautiful love poem. So that is my review of the book. I feel like they need to have a second edition or some type of sequel, but love poems from around the world, because this was not diverse enough. I wanted to share with you one of the love poems that I wrote. I don't write many poems about love. It's very, very rare. I think this was actually the first love poem I ever written. It is about just, feeling some type of way. It's called Gold Diggers, and I hope you like it. The reason I wrote this poem is because as I mentioned before in other videos, I had a 6-year relationship and it ended very, very badly. I was very heartbroken, and I'm still kind of recovering from it because I lost a lot of stuff from that relationship. I invested in this person emotionally, financially. I was their therapist. I housed them and underneath my roof and all of these things. And I felt like I was disrespected. And when they left, I felt I had given everything of me to them. But now that I'm older, I'm not old, but I'm getting older and growing in maturity, the pain that I felt then, I don't really feel now. It's a lesson that I've come to learn. I'm actually glad I went through this lesson because it taught me that you truly need to invest in yourself. You can't put all of your eggs in one basket. The truest, the greatest love of all is you. The love you have for yourself is going to dictate to the world how they treat you. And at that time, I didn't have love for myself. I was giving it to this person. So when I wrote this, I was very, very heartbroken. And it's basically an imaginary story about like everything I went through. So it's called Gold Diggers, and it is 4 stanzas. This is how it goes. He left her shack for palaces anew, and bid the world she built for him adieu. She tried, but time is copper against gold. Glitter said come, therefore his mind was sold. She watched him leave, and in a tattered state, she still set out a second dinner plate. In case empires fell, life couldn't tell, perhaps all were beneath a golden spell. She wondered if he thought about the shack. No, no, he had completely turned his back, for there was something better which she lacked, and sweat was pennies when compared to stacks. Maybe she'd get a shovel too and try herself to craft sleek towers to the sky, to stand above the fickle earth and laugh, reverse her have-not lifestyle into halves. His mind proclaimed that he had won the game. Apologetic lines devoid of shame. He must invest his life in grander feats. Perhaps this road would make him feel complete. His shovel lay against his fleeting boots, in case he had to take another route. For he was king. There was no living thing to block his hand from pulling his own strings. She trained her eyes for monetary skies. He found his gold was pyrite in disguise. Her love had numbers now, her heart a price. There was no value given to suffice her satisfaction. He thought of the cost of all she'd given, all that he had lost. He wondered if that gold was worth its weight in riches as that second dinner plate. So yeah, I haven't read this poem in a long time, but now that I'm reading it, it's basically the state I'm going through now. That's why, even though I didn't really care for some of the poems in here where the woman is like, she's evil and she is Satan herself, I can understand the passion these dudes felt, when your heart is broken. But for every broken heart, there is always a new opportunity for new love to come in. Because once you've gone through a broken heart, you have to make the decision to open yourself up to love again. And once you've had these experiences and you get love again, it's even richer because you appreciate it more this time. You're like, wow, I searched for so long for this to come and now it is here and I'm so happy and glad that it is here. Like one example is my cousin. She got heartbroken by her high school sweetheart, and she just went through all of these just terrible relationships. So she prayed to God and said, please send somebody. Just send someone. And lo and behold, she met her husband not too long later. She didn't even have to wait that long. He married her. They have a beautiful baby together, and they're just happy and united as a family. So happy Valentine's Day to everyone. I hope that you all feel the love for yourself in your heart. I love you too, my dear subscribers, my dear friends who I cannot see. You are always in my heart, and I will talk to you later. Bye bye, everyone.